There we are. We are live again. Sweet. All right, YouTube, Triple Eight back here once again with my good friend Duff. Duff, say hello.
Hey everyone.
It has been a very long week, and forgive me, YouTube, but I am actually pretty tired because I worked every single day last week and this week, and it's been a long shift. So we will not be having a a stupendously long podcast tonight, but get a lot of ideas in. And the good news is there's been a lot of news. The bad news is there's been a lot of crazy news. So we're going to talk about a few things, and unfortunately, you've probably already heard a few of these topics, so we're gonna try and touch on a few things and touch on a few things maybe you didn't hear. But firstly, as many have probably heard and seen from mainstream media, there is a lot of talk about our great President Trump, I guess quote unquote great, taking away the immigrant children. Now, I hopefully people have researched this a bit more and have understood what's really going on and all the legality behind what he's doing and the laws that have been created and all those things. So, for anyone who has not heard of it yet, the mainstream media is talking about the immigration enforcement ICE part of the government that is trying to go and rip away children from their parents as they enter illegally into the U.S. And they're saying, oh, Trump made a law. He doesn't want these kids and their families to be together, and he's terrible and awful. And why is he doing this? We should stop him. Now, that's wrong. That's very misleading. As has been pointed out by a few news articles, such as the Daily Wire, of course. There was a bill in 1997, and it was to say that any child that was unaccompanied by a parent was removed from that parent or guardian and placed somewhere else. And then in 2016, the Ninth Circuit Court ruled that also included accompanied minors. So every child from a family member or not guardian was removed from the family, but then they would later be released 20 days later. So it's a bad law, or it's a questionable one, and it was so to keep children out of the cells of the with their parents, and basically it's not it was good while it was there, and Trump is just following the law. Now we can debate trying to get it fixed, but it's not Trump's fault. Anyway, it's a long way of saying that they're lying. But Duff, have you what have talked about with you?
Yeah, this has been, of course, a big story for the past, I guess, 3 weeks now, and it's one of those instances where the laws that were passed were done so apparently with no intention of ever enforcing them. So I guess they were considered kind of like a legal olive branch that could be used to deter people from trying to cross over the border illegally, because the idea that if you're doing it as a family, getting your kids separated from you is considered a really bad thing. But with Trump saying we are actually going to be enforcing our border policy as a nation, suddenly this particular clause is becoming more upfront and center. The big infamy coming out of it, though, is the majority of the pictures being released actually were taken during the Obama administration of people being locked into pens and other things. But I kind of get a sense of hypocrisy about the whole thing, because if you want people to come into your country legally, you do have to dissuade them from coming in illegally in some way. And although I think this is sort of a questionable thing to do, that nations would try to protect their borders, but also try and prevent people from trying to sneak in and bring dependents with them, doesn't really seem that much of an intellectual leap to make. But of course, now that they're enforcing it, it's more in the news. They can bring it up more readily, and on a personal level, I think that's a good thing, because anytime you try and house people who are sneaking across a border, you run the risk of basically turning them over into refugee-style camps, which may not be well policed. They might actually be policed very strictly, or done so in a way which actually does violate people's rights. And if you don't actually have a camera shone on them, then all sorts of bad things can happen. But the idea that this type of deterrence is totally unthinkable as it's being portrayed in a lot of American news media. I don't quite agree with their reasoning on that, despite not actually thinking that this was a good way to go about doing it. But what do you think there, AAA?
Yeah, I think that the well, firstly, let's all, get to the same baseline of saying that I don't think that it's right to the idea of separating children from the families is bad. We don't want children, going across the border illegally and having abuse from whomever to promise. Because what a lot of things. Issue with this is the fact that some of these kids are not related to whoever they brought over, and their parents say, okay, we're going to try to give you the best life here and give you kind of a way to whomever to get you across the border, and good luck to you. And so some of these kids are being forced to take really treacherous trails across the border, and then just hope for the best. So it's just a very bad idea in general. And there's also the issue where if you come across the main border seeking asylum, you're good. They let you in. You didn't break the law. But if you come across I think it's two borders or whatever, I might be quoting that wrong, then it is illegal. So there's actually a pretty easy fix to get around this, and people are doing it the wrong way, and they're being taken away. And also we should mention that the kids are, yes, I'm sure there are cases where ICE agents or whomever that are taking these kids maybe aren't in the best conditions, and then maybe are being hurt and whatever else. But there are also a lot of, these ICE agents, they have kids of themselves. They have families, so they're not like abusing these children, whatever. They're not in cages. They're not being hurt by any means. Those pictures came from 2016 when the Obama administration. So you got to realize where all this, where the origin of all this is from. But yeah, and then at the same time, after this was a big mess, Trump tried to make an executive order to fix the problem. It kind of worked. It kind of didn't do much, and he kind of just said, "Here's what I'm going to do." And then he handed it to the Democrats and said, "Hey, Congress, fix it." And they didn't. So at the same time, they're just using this as a club on Trump. And now we're realizing, hey, Democrats just want to have amnesty, because if you can't keep them with the parents, you can't take them away from the parents, then what do? This is an open border policy, and it's a bit of a scary thought. But I don't know, Duff, do you think open borders is a good idea?
Well, see, if our friend Crow is here, he would be saying absolutely. If you just removed all border restrictions, most people would move back to their own countries after they'd finished helping out or working in a particular industry, like fruit picking or vegetable picking kind of thing. But I happen to agree more along the lines with Eric Weinstein in this particular issue, in that the immigration and illegal immigration crisis has more to do with money changing hands than it has to do with actually caring about the people who are trying to escape or trying to just get a better life. And as he says, it's more about people within a particular party trying to shuffle money to other people in this particular party, i.e. special interest groups surrounding or that focus on the illegal immigration issue and try and make it look like the country is bad for saying, we want to be able to vet who's coming into our country. We want to have final say. And we want to be able to say, we can make it so that it is disadvantageous to try and sneak across, to sort of disincentivize what's going on. And so, yeah, I find it's really disingenuous on many levels. And the saddest part is, as you pointed out earlier there, AAA, some of these kids aren't even the kids of the people who are smuggling them across, but rather bringing the kids is kind of like bringing a bargaining chip that will likely increase the amount of time which you're going to be staying in the United States, and also increase the likelihood that you might stay indefinitely if you are caught, right? So in other words, it's a way of maximizing your potential benefit if you're caught, but also maximizing your potential benefit if you're not. Because it's like, who wants to send kids back to the horrible things that are happening in Mexico? And I read an article recently where, leading up to the current Mexican election, something like 120 politicians have been gunned down, basically for espousing views that run contrary to the various gangs in regions of northern Mexico, and you have politicians being like, "Oh yeah, poor people flee to the United States. They'll deal with you." And so if that nation's policy is actually to push their disenfranchised people out of their nation, and yet you're saying that the United States are bad people for saying, no, a nation has to deal with its own people, then you're kind of being a hypocrite as well, or at least willfully blind to the fact that there's more going on than just what's happening at the US border.
That's true. Yeah, well, and I don't. Actually, I had a discussion with a friend of mine this week about immigration, and he, thankfully, is a we differ a lot, which is really cool, just because I can go and talk to him about topics and see other points of view, and I do try to research them, obviously, but it's nice to kind of get to the fundamentals of what's going on. And we talked about the immigration crisis, and he said, I wouldn't mind letting them through and kind of giving them amnesty. And I said, oh, well, wouldn't that be a little unfair if, all the people that are waiting in line and everyone kind of gets in for free, and why? I mean, are we able to really take care of everyone here? Because we have citizens here that we haven't taken care of. So why would you want to add more to the field of the fire? And he says, well, it's the right thing to do. And so it seems like a lot of the issues we're having about people coming over and what's right and what's wrong, save the kids, all that kind of stuff is more I feel as though, not to use feelings, but I think the logical core is just left and right. Everyone wants, well, I guess let's just put it this way. The left wants the feeling of, oh, hey, I did a great job today, and even if the policy looks bad, as long as I can make it look good, I'm great. And on the other side, the right kind of feeling, well, here's what should happen. Here was what works out better for everyone else. And it's just kind of that, here's a quick little, I did this thing, I feel good, as opposed to here is how it should go to, long-term well-being, as opposed to, all right, here's a quick journal article that I wrote, and I feel better inside. So I think we all in the end have the same goal, but there's the quick fix, which is unfortunately just has a little ripple effect that makes big problems, or there's the well-intentioned and hopefully more reasoned laws that we have to essentially say, we're going to try to make sure that we take little steps to fix the problem and actually get it fixed. So I guess it's a good thing we're having the same goals, but I think we're definitely choosing very different solutions to get there. Is that fair to say, Duff?
Sure. Within reason. I think the only thing I'd push back on is when people say it's the right thing to do. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? And what metric are you measuring right by, kind of thing? And here I'll raise an interesting piece of data. So apparently the U.S., a private company in the U.S. that basically does data collection was hired out basically to look at the economic impact of illegal migrants. And what they found is that many illegal migrants actually end up getting jobs, and they're actually taxed for what they do, and they buy things, so they can actually contribute to the economy. So the idea that people who want to come into a country and who are willing to work are disproportionately large compared to the amount of people that potentially get let in through the official means is true. And I think that's kind of a sad state, where it's like there's people who want to actually participate and actually be part of a country, and they're being blocked. So they feel that the only thing that they can do is sneak in illegally and see how long they can stay and hope for things to change. And for whatever government administration to look at them and be like, hey, you've been here for 10 years, sure, you've been here illegally, but you've been trying your best to pay taxes, you send your kids to school, and you actually want a better life and you want to be American, we'll hold all those things as being good, right? And maybe have a secondary measure which you can apply to allow people who have shown that they want to stay and want to be a part of the nation, not just part of their local community, and allows them to stay through those means, I would have no disagreement with. But it's kind of a roundabout problem where it's like, once again, you're only looking at it from the perspective of what's happening in the States. What is driving these people to come to the States, you could say, is like, well, they don't have the same economic opportunities in their countries of origin. And it's like, that's very much true. But if they run away, and if everyone continuously runs away from these regions, you're never going to see any improvement in those particular regions. And that means that they can write off their problems on another nation's, let's say, conscience. And that ends up being a very abusive relationship as well. So are you willing to allow someone to abuse your generosity knowingly? And there's a lot of people who seem to say yes. And it's like, but those are the people who don't tend to have to live in the neighborhoods where maybe some of the not quite so well-intended might live, and don't actually have to deal with the problem on a day-to-day basis. So it's not a, let's say, fair and balanced look at what's going on. And when people say, well, you know, it's for the best that we do this, it's like, well, what's your measure for best? Because I don't actually think it is if you sit down and think about it. But will it stop anytime soon? Probably not.
Well, thank goodness you were the sunshine that we all need right now, Duff. I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with that. The metric to measure is really vague, and that's the main issue there. And I mean, that got even to the point where, you know, we talked about we are even getting mad at our own. There was an article I saw before where a woman, I can't remember, can't remember what she was going for, but she was trying to be elected, and she was I think Cynthia Nixon's her name, and she talked about she wanted to abolish ICE because it was a terrorist organization. So now I find it funny where you know, we have the Second Amendment debate where it's like, oh, by the way, we don't need guns, armed, our police and army and all the, you know, the government will protect us, and yet ICE is a government entity, and says, okay, they're terrorists, so the government's terrible. And I'm like, so you want the government to protect you, but you don't want the government to protect you, and you are. It's just very. I find it very hard to be a Democrat or in that area right now, because it's just very flip flop, and it's interesting to see. But anyway, any thoughts regarding those kind of outbursts, there, Duff?
Well, so Cynthia Nixon, one of her big claims to fame is she was actually one of the characters on Sex and the City. Right. For I forget what her on-screen character's name was, but she highlights what I was talking about earlier about people who have strong opinions about this, who will never have to live in areas where this has an impact. So if you're running in New York, what's the chance that an illegal migrant is going to get into New York by crossing over the border at the southern end of the United States, right? You might see some Cubans. You might see some Cubans kind of thing. But you're not really having to deal with it on a practical level. And the big irony with this as well is, in the United States, your Federal Bureau of Investigation isn't actually a police force, quote unquote. So you needed to create a secondary police force that had extrajudicial authority to move through different states in order to deal with illegal migration and illegal movement of people and, in fact, human trafficking. And one of the things which Nixon probably willfully forgets is the majority of what ICE deals with is human trafficking across multiple interstate borders, and how poorly people can be treated there. So you go, well, if you get rid of ICE, who's going to be going after those human traffickers there, Cynthia? And if you don't have a federal force that is able to do that, how on a state level are you going to organize the police to try and deal with these organizations which might span multiple states, kind of thing? So that feels like a real stretch. And to say that they're a terrorist organization, it's like, well, sadly, that word now has almost no meaning as well. It's like, well, what do you mean when you mean terrorists? Because apparently everybody's a terrorist now. And it's like, a terrorist is supposed to be someone who is willing to inflict violence upon a civilian population in order to either raise awareness for their particular means or to influence a particular region towards a particular end. And as far as I know, ICE isn't trying to change American voting trends, and it also isn't going in and executing people willy-nilly and indiscriminately. So she's using a term which is non-descriptive, and that doesn't really say too much about her grasp of what's going on.
Yeah, that's true. I think, you know, it's just more telling of, again, when Trump said, I'm going to try, and then Chuck Schumer said, oh, no, well, I don't want to. And so it's very obvious where, you know, it's I was watching a CRTV with Steven Crowder and the I can't remember the not KJ the middle guy who does the one. I can't remember think of his name at the moment, but he talked about how we're to the point where the left really just doesn't like American values at all, and so he's like, well, that's fine, go somewhere else. And it's very interesting to see how open they are. But hey, I don't like this, I don't like that. These people are, Nazi terrorists, Islamophobe, whatever. And
Mhm.
see how everyone's split. So that's just terrifying. But anyway, I wanted to. So I think I hope the policy gets fixed. I don't think Trump's. He's doing some good things and doing some bad things, but I wouldn't blame him on this stuff. But I hope that this ends soon and we can not to go on to the next terrible thing, but I hope that the the policy does change for the better overall. So anyway, moving on a little bit more. Other news, I don't know if anyone else is. I'm sure you guys have heard. We have some big shakeups in Supreme Court. So two right now that I've seen. The first one talks about the Supreme Court ruling, quote unquote, against unions. So, as I'm understanding this, and Duff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess there was a court case where a gentleman was trying to get out of paying dues because the union was doing things he didn't believe in, and the union said, "No, you have to pay us." Went to the Supreme Court, and they said basically that yes, we are going to rule that you can get out of the union dues and do what you want because you don't agree with them. That's a very generalized version of what happened, but Duff, I don't know if you've heard about this or what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So essentially, the decision overturned a decision which was made in, I think, the 1950s or 1960s
Been a
that
while, yes.
said you, even if you do not wish to be a part of the union, you are behooved to pay union dues because the union is working on your behalf, and therefore any benefits that you gain as a outstretch of this means that you owe the union for its work. And therefore, even if you're not a member of the union, you have to pay the union dues. And what they would say is this is to prevent free riders, so people who are just benefiting from the union without actually having to pay into it. And what the court ended up saying is this doesn't actually work. Because if someone says, I'm not willing to, I wish to negotiate on my own, and they were to use the union's precedent in order to negotiate, well, that's normal. So it's like in any case, you use precedent from what else is going on, and we don't actually require you to pay a licensing fee to use someone else's precedent, right? So for the union to say we can ask for money and require you to pay it with no services directly given to you is unconstitutional, right? In fact, it's kind of, I think it's, what is it? It's in a weird way, it's kind of like entrapment. So it's like they get what they want irregardless of what you want, and you have to pay them for it. So it's basically paying somebody for a job which you didn't ask them to do, for the reason that if you didn't not ask them to do it, then you would not get benefit from it.
Yeah, it's I mean, a long time coming. Obviously, like you said, it's been court ruled that years ago, decades ago, and yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's anything bad to say. Well, I don't want you negotiating for me. And as I was watching things in the Daily Wire, excuse me, damn, the one point that the left said, well, we want to make sure that we can go and negotiate the best, and it's kind of like, well, yeah, but you're negotiating against the worker right now. You're negotiating with the company, so it doesn't actually. There's a conflict of interest right now, and pardon me one second. The where is this coming from? Okay, one, sorry. Stop calling me. All right. And the issue right now is the fact that like we're saying, there's no point to go and as you said, point out the fact of, hey, I don't want this kind of deal. And I'm sorry. So my point was going to be the word they used was labor peace. So they want to make sure that no matter what, XYZ is guaranteed to the labor. They don't want to have the monopoly, which is ironic because you're calling for specific requirements, and then you have the issue of certain workforces don't want to strike. They don't get what they want. and they say, okay, hey, this is what I want to have, and we don't agree with the stuff, and I have to keep paying dues, so we're just going to walk off the job, and that's also awful. So I think this is a really good idea, and now people can do what they want to do when they want to do it, and it actually gives them freedom to do stuff. And hopefully this actually, I do think this will help out overall. And I mean, of course, I'm sure Duff, the unions originally were to fight and protect the labor force, but now could we agree that they're kind of flipping, I guess, on the workers? Is that fair to say?
Well, more so, what I'd say is this court case is with regards to public sector unions, and essentially the union would be acting as a political protection racket on some level as well. Whereas in, let's say, a private sector, you can still have unions that are negotiating on behalf of workers, but the union probably has to offer a little bit more in order to incentivize workers to join. Whereas public sector unions, you could make the argument that they're not incentivizing people properly to try and work collectively for something. And because they're not offering that incentive, if someone were to say, well, I don't think I should be a part of the union then because it doesn't really benefit me, they would see that as being, hypocrisy. It's like, how dare you not let us support you? How dare you think that we're not getting the best for you? And it's like, but the thing is, if you can't actually back up that you are, then all you're doing is hot air, and you're using the Constitution of the United States to make me pay you money. Not that I asked you to do something for me, and not that I want to give you my money, but you are making me. That's extortion, kind of thing. So it's one of those ones where I think, legally speaking, this makes a lot of sense as a clarification within the Supreme Court. And it's actually nice to see them go back and say, like, hey, look, this appears to have been an invented thing that was on the possibility that you would have, let's say, less harmony in the workforce if someone were to keep working while there was a strike going on. So it was actually for the benefit of that person that they'd be forced to go on strike too, because otherwise people would resent them. And it's like, well, how do you know people would resent them? And if that resentment is actually being forced from the union down, then that's, once again, not really good either. So in both cases, it becomes more like a protection racket and less like a, let's say, a viable and self-selected group of people saying, hey, we have similar goals. We want to negotiate by ourselves. And we want to negotiate as a group. And we're going to convince you that it's better for us to do that with you as a part of us than to actually legislate you into paying for us, even though you might not have a say in what's going on.
Yeah, I that's true. And you know a bit more about that than I do. But it's like I said, it sounds like this is a much needed ruling, a great clarification, and I'm hoping that this opens the doors up for freelancers or whomever to do what they want to do and get paid what they want to get paid, and be free to be themselves. And hopefully, I mean, another, I guess, this is the phrase, a lot of winning there, right?
Well, the funny thing as well is, literally based off of this case, the guy could turn around 10 years later and be like, whoops, I made a mistake. But at least now he could opt in, right? As opposed to being forced to be a part of from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's true. No, I think it's much. I think it's funny that the left wants to manufacture freedom, while these guys just want to be free. I mean, there's a great irony there. So yeah, I think overall this is good, and I think it will do a lot of good things because not that was a good Trump, and there's the bad Trump where Trump did some tariffy things. That's not so good, but that's a different story. But yeah, I think overall, this I'm glad that this ruling happened, and it'll bring more jobs, and people will be happy. So that's great news. Which, in addition to talking about the Supreme Court, I imagine you heard about the retirement of Anthony Kennedy, I believe is his name. I might be wrong about that, but you heard about this story there, Duff?
Yeah, so Justice Kennedy is stepping down from his position with the Supreme Court of the United States. And it's odd because it would seem that he's stepping down in order to make sure that someone who would be willing to be a swing vote would be put in his place. So it's like, why didn't he step down during the Obama administration earlier so that they could get a Democrat in there? But then you look at the history of Justice Kennedy's votes, and he can often vote against what would seem to be the more democratic mindset or what they want to get through. So even though many people have issues with Justice Kennedy, he at least was willing to work bipartisanly and also to, at times, be a literalist when it came to the American Constitution. So he appears to be stepping down in a time where the Republicans are in charge, specifically so that they can get a Republican judge to be a swing vote in the future, which is looking like hypocrisy to a lot of people on the political left. But what are your thoughts there?
No, I think it's pretty great and interesting time, like you said, that he's doing this. Trump had Gorsuch, and that was a good pick. And Gorsuch has done a lot of things, and we have rulings of a lot of the older, like for example, the Union I heard was a 4-4, now it was a 5-4, and now we can have a lot more cases potentially be overturned if Trump picks a good nominee. I heard Trump wanted to nominate Mike Lee from Utah. I've also heard people say that we want to keep Mike Lee as a senator there. So I really do think that's another great chance for Trump to lead conservatively, hopefully, because he seems to have a decent-ish track record doing that. So yeah, I mean, if there is a pick that he has and they are conservative, ish Republican, and they agree with Gorsuch and Trump, then I mean, yeah, we could see a lot of things get overturned, Roe v. Wade, all those other major court cases and stuff. So it's definitely, I'm definitely surprised at all of the things happening at this rate right now during his presidency and seeing all the changes being made. And it's very interesting to see how the other side is reacting to all of these terrible, horrible, oh, hey, we had this court case, now we're changing, and it's awful, and he's Hitlerian, changing the government, he's ruling over, and just the freak out and the backlash of all these things happening, where it's interesting to see he's following the law, they make a law, he follows the law, then they hate the law that they made and blame him for making the law. And there was even I think there was an article that I saw about the court, something on the lines of the court rules this legally or whatever, and they basically said that, oh, why is the court ruling legally against this thing, and of the irony of, because the court uses laws to make decisions. That's their purpose. And it was just very, it's interesting to see how blind or ignorant that whoever wrote the article was to talk about. The law is great when it works at this time, but any other time, it's always this hateful, illegal stuff. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's a good pick, and hopefully he'll continue to make good decisions there. And it sounds, I don't know, were you a fan of his, or you were definitely kind of like he was a swinger, or I guess he just used to.
Yeah. I honestly don't know. Not my country. But but what I would say is this. I've found it really interesting to follow Judge Gorsuch since his appointment, because there's been times where he said no to Trump. But the way which he says no is how I think a judge should say no, which is that if someone asks you to do something, and if you look at the law and you, as it is literally, and you go, well, that's not what the law says, so no, we can't do that. But if you wanted to start the process to creating a new law, here's what you need to do, right? As opposed to some people's interpretations, which would be like, well, even though this was written so many years ago, they actually meant that they were going to include everything that we have today, and so we can just fudge the wording and we can pass a law. And it's like, well, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You need to take the time to say, hey, this isn't covered in the law as it stands. Ergo, we need to take some time to figure out a new law which we can bring in to address this problem. But if it's not in the law right now, we can't actually push that through. So the nice thing, I think, with the appointment of Justice Gorsuch, and hopefully with the follow-up quick, is you'll have judges who will literally say, we will not immediately make changes to the American Constitution. We won't immediately make changes to laws until we've created a new law, right? So it's like, if there's a law in the books which makes no sense in the context of today, well, it's still on the books. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to actually strike it from the books and then create a new law. We can't finagle it to make it seem like we want it to, to make it what we would like it to be. And that I think is actually a good thing. It actually would take longer than, let's say, some activist groups might want, but at least then you've had the process, you've had the revision, you've had the hearings, you've had it voted on, and then you'll have the legal minds in the Supreme Court looking at it and saying, well, is it constitutional, is it not? And you would actually have really good checks and balances that would hopefully produce a more amicable law for everybody, not just the particular group that the special interest organization is pushing for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting to see this happen now, and I think this is a good idea. So I hope that he makes more. I call this a simple decision, simple choice to make, and we'll have much more. I don't know. Maybe the Supreme Court will actually now follow the law. It'd be crazy. But so yeah, it's good news overall, I think. But lastly, I wanted to mention to you and our viewers about the great, I don't say uprising, but the I guess interesting election that we had recently with the new New York Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio. I destroyed that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I guess is her name, and she just beat Joe Crowley in New York by declaring that she was a democratic socialist and going off and basically just ranting about saying that having the same speech Bernie Sanders gave about how she wanted everything free. I imagine you heard this story too, correct, Duff?
Yeah, and that's not surprising because I think this was in a writing in New York as well, wasn't it?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, what region was this in? This was.
Yes, it was. She beat the. This says I'm getting information from both Daily Wire and I guess now it's biography.com. This says she beat 10-term New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley in New York's 14th Congressional District in the primary. So she won that office, which was surprising because he had won it, I guess, for a decade, and then she just basically parroted Bernie Sanders' views and everything. I mean, she worked for that campaign. Her Democratic, what was this say? Her Democratic, gotta find the right title here. The campaign manager, I guess, actually was racist enough to talk about greedy Jews. I mean, this is not the best representative, but yeah. So she won there. He's trying to push all the, I want people to be able to get a job no matter what. I want to get rid of poverty. I want free healthcare, free tuition, and I want to get rid of ICE. And I mean, again, it's just if Bernie Sanders had a best friend from Puerto Rico, whatever, it's those same lines, which how much the Democratic Party is shifting over to the left, and they're being pretty open and honest with what they want, which is, I guess, good news. And we'll see how that turns out. But I mean, so I guess you're saying you're not very surprised by the results there, Duff.
No, and as other outlets have said, apparently the incumbent just didn't really bother to campaign. And you have in New York, a lot of people who were voting for Hillary. You have a lot of people who are of a more, let's say, socialist bent. And so for someone to run on a socialist platform and actually to make some headway in those conditions is not surprising at all. The thing which is always a pain in the butt, though, is so if you give everybody healthcare, if you give everybody a job, then in the job perspective, you're basically making jobs which are jobs designed to promote mediocrity, because it's like everyone is everyone is entitled to a job. So it's like, well, okay, well, where are we going to find these jobs? How are we going to get them? And if everyone has to have one, then how are we going to determine how they get those jobs? Because otherwise you just end up with basically a lot of janitors or a lot of people in industries which are completely superfluous. And so it's like a good example from communist Russia back in the days. There was factories that were required to produce quotas of whatever it is they were producing, but they had no market to sell to. So literally toasters would pile up and they just take them directly to the dump. And then more toasters would pile up and they take them directly to the dump because everyone had to have a job. So you're running these jobs at a net loss, which hurts society overall as opposed to helping it. And the thing with universal healthcare is I actually think it's a really cool thing as a median measure, meaning to say it's like we're going to offer this minimum amount of care, and we want it to be a good amount because we actually want to stimulate private industry and private healthcare to provide something better and be competitive in the market, right? But to say that it's universal healthcare is free healthcare is a huge misnomer. You're paying through it for your taxes, you're paying through it through other things. And in a lot of ways, you're probably going to be paying more because there isn't any competition to drive down the price of any particular thing. So it's a lot of pie in the sky, but when it actually comes down to bringing these things about, we still have yet to see any socialist system exist long term. And we have still yet to see any outright communist system be able to survive long term without tremendous amounts of social control, where basically the head party controls society at a very aggressive and, in fact, we'd say dehumanizing level, where it's like, you know, people become another resource that you can burn through at a state level. And if someone starts to complain, well, of course, you're complaining against the betterment of society, so you need to be silenced and pushed out or sent to a gulag kind of thing. So it's one of those ones where, in theory, it all sounds really good, but then you say, okay, well, where's this going to come from? And it's like, well, we're going to tax the rich. And it's like, what if they move? Well, we're going to prevent them from moving. And it's like, so basically you just imprison people because they make too much money. And it's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, what if they stop making that amount of money? Are you going to let them go? Well, no, because they still had the audacity to be rich at some point in their life. And of course, most rich people aren't rich for long. In reality, most people who make it into the upper tax bracket apparently only stay there for about a 5 to 10 year period, and they tend to fall out of it. So that's kind of an odd thing, which they never tend to mention.
Well, that's true. That was a statistic I think Ben made about you go in and out of that tax bracket quite a bit. So it just depends on, you know, we've got, I mean, the good news overall is, you know, from, I think there was a study done talking about how between 1950 and I can't remember that year, maybe it was the 70s or 80s, and they discussed how the rate in which people were moving to the upper class increased, and we got rid of the level of people that were in poverty decreased and went to the upper middle class. And so that was not, you know, getting making the poverty worse. It was actually just saying, hey, here are a group of people who are doing better overall. And then, yeah, like you said, they've got people that are in the 1%, they fall out of the 1%. And once again, you know, when we talk about that, they're not, I mean, that's, I think the numbers were 1% was you make 350 million or 360 million, or million, I'm sorry, $360,000 a year, which, yes, is a lot of money, but we're not talking about the millionaires and billionaires and all those fun things. So it's just, it's very misleading to discuss, oh, here the rich guy is, which, by the way, speaking of the rich, Bernie made $1 million last year. He didn't talk about that, but yeah, I agree. I think that it looks nice, it sounds nice, you'd want it to be nice, but and all the countries that, you know, have gotten there are crappy, or they had capitalistic means of production which got the money, then they tried socialistic kind of means, and now they're not doing necessarily as well, and or they're agreeing on stuff. So it's it looks good on paper, I guess. It's kind of your conclusion there, right?
Yeah, but it's funny. So we have a commenter, Ben Soros, and Ben, thank you for your comments because he's providing a nice devil's advocate for what we're saying.
Oh, good.
Socialized societies can function quite well. In fact, societies that borrow from social doctrine or socialist doctrine can function very well for very long periods of time, and in fact compete in strong ways. But on the whole of it, though, the surprising thing is always how far are they willing to push it, because despite the fact that you say you're a democratic socialist, the democratic part of socialism tends to go by the wayside, and they tend to function like communist societies in that there becomes the party, and the party decides things. And so it's always that balancing act between trying to remove totalitarian elements, but also trying to benefit more people. So it's like here in Canada, we try and do that through crown corporations, which are trying to stimulate particular aspects of the economy, or to provide, once again, minimal services levels, which ideally are quite good, so that any company that wants to come in order to compete, let's say for the mail, let's say for water services or something like that, are required to give good quality services to the public as opposed to holding them hostage because they have a monopolistic control over the infrastructure. But thank you for that, Ben. We appreciate that thoughtful commentary.
Yes, we do. We definitely try to make sure that we're on our toes about everything there. And of course, that it's nice to have someone else to agree, disagree with us, because I definitely don't know everything, and it's nice to see all the other points. But anyway, yeah, it was interesting to see about all of her parroting Bernie and that kind of stuff. And hopefully, you know, I mean, I guess I am curious to see how she debates the next her next opponent. I think is the Republican candidate. I don't know his name, but that'll be interesting to see that. And like I said, it's interesting to see how far the Democratic Party is going, because they're kind of, you know, you thought that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi had the lead, and now they are easily kind of slowly being kicked out and saying, hey, you know, we are here for the Bernie, we're here for the Elizabeth Warren and all those people, and saying, hey, this is the new party, and we are here to stay. Here's what we want to do, and if you don't like they're being very open and honest about how much they disagree with anyone that disagrees with them. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how far she gets and what her opposition will look like, and you know how much the media will prop her up, and you know we'll see what happens there. But I guess those are your probably good final thoughts on that, on her there, Duff.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see where she goes. It would be, I would be surprised if, sorry, I'm curious to see what sort of larger scale impact she will be able to have, because I don't know if the entirety of the Democratic Party is going to be shifting that far. Although it does seem that the amount of Democrats who are espousing more socialist Democratic positions are getting more camera time at the time being. But we'll see. I don't know. Yeah, I think we can leave it there. What's the next topic there, AAA?
I'm sorry?
What's the next topic there, AAA?
The next, I think that was the majority of what I had written down for this evening, because I know you had to run tonight for your coffee and stuff. No, I think that's good. It's good to that would be a good one to end on, and to say, you know, that's the future of the party, and now we'll get to see how the right reacts to it, and we'll hopefully, you know, the violence will end. I hope it ends quickly, and we're done with it, but I kind of doubt it. So. Not entirely sure, but I think that's it's nice to see that even if it is terrifying, they're being more honest about their intentions, and that will be a great example to say, hey, you know, you guys want this and that, and here are examples of why it doesn't work, and let's talk about how to fix some stuff. So yeah, I you know, truth is always best, and I think you and I can both agree that now they won't hide anymore, right?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. I'm unwilling to make a definitive statement on that comment.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that they are, well, they're getting braver, and their rhetoric towards the level in which they want change or violence or whomever, whatever is increasing. So we are seeing the, you know, yells, cries of violence increasing, and again, I hope it doesn't boil over. We're seeing kind of boil over, so you know, it's just getting a little scary out there. So let's hope that we can be as civil as possible, and get more that way. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. It's been good to see you again. I'll be back next week here again with Duff, and until next time, we hope you all have a great weekend. Duff, you want to say as we head out?
All right, have a great week there, guys. And happy Canada Day to any of our Canadian listeners. That's happening tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, well, what he said. If I don't say it now, of course, happy pre-4th of July to everyone out there, too. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next week. So thank you.